We can bring in-depth conversation to public radio and podcasting, the likes of which those worlds have never before seen, if the show gets to 10,000 podcast subscribers in 2011. Helping us achieve that is, fortunately, easiness itself. Just turn a friend or two onto the show. Do that a few times and we'll shoot past 10,000 in no time, assuring you a steady stream of more and better cultural conversations straight to your brain. Well, they go through your ears first, but they get in there eventually. Thanks. This week it's a conversation with bookmaker and design philosopher Leonard Koren on the marketplace of ideas, cultural conversation of the depth you demand. The marketplace of ideas. I am your man of letters and sound waves, Colin Marshall. Today I'm talking to Leonard Koren, who's often called a design philosopher. He trained as an artist and an architect. He founded and published the 1970s magazine Wet, the Magazine of Gourmet Bathing, and he's the creator of books like Wabi-Sabi for artists, designers, poets, and philosophers, How to Rake Leaves, How to Take a Japanese Bath, and Gardens of Gravel and Sand. His new book, though, takes on a fundamental question. It's called, Which Aesthetics Do You Mean? 10 Definitions. Leonard, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
I called you the creator of those books that I named because, I know it says you're the author on the back of them, but it also feels not quite right to me to call you an author and have the implication be just the writer of a text, although I don't know if creator nails it either. How do you think of your role in the making of these distinctive books that you make?
When people ask me what I do, the short answer is I make books because I'm involved in every aspect of it, from the conception to the writing to getting the imagery together to publishing it, although sometimes I'm the de facto publisher and go through another company, which is the nominal publisher. I don't think of myself as a writer. The writing is a relatively small part of the project, significant, of course, but usually comes towards the end. The thinking, the conceptualizing is much more in-depth and time-consuming aspect. So I think I would agree with you that making books, or as you use the more flattering term, creating books, is what I do.
And the new book, Which Aesthetics Do You Mean? I think about the concept of presenting the possible definitions of aesthetics, and how well does that describe the concept you had in your mind when you moved forward with this? Just presenting what types of aesthetics there are in terms of when people talk about that word.
For quite a while, I'd wanted to I thought my next book was going to be an aesthetics primer. This is a rather daunting assignment to give oneself, considering the amount of mental energy and the stellar quality of that mental energy that's been devoted to thinking about what aesthetics is in a philosophical sense for a few thousand years. In other words, I didn't know how to approach making an aesthetics primer. I tried a number of different approaches, and they all fell short. One of the, criteria that I set for myself when making books is I really don't want to make a book that somebody else could do just as well or perhaps even better. I want to make a book that comes from what and who I am. And I know this sounds a little bit maybe self-indulgent, but I find that with so many things out there in the marketplace to engage our attention or enthusiasms, I want to make something that's really authentic. Getting back to the aesthetics book, the approach that I ended up coming up with, defining the word in various ways, and then using these definitions in the context of a story about the making of the book, it seemed to feel right to me, and took a long way, trying to get to that point, but when I did, there was something satisfying about it. although it's, I don't think in any way a ponderous book or a heavy book, and it's certainly not a very long book, but I think I covered the territory I wanted to do. I wanted to do an introductory text for people who are interested in what philosophical aesthetics is all about, even if they don't even know that a term philosophical aesthetics exists.
And of course you mention the personal narrative at the end of the book, talking about the making of the book and working in the 10 different definitions of aesthetics that you earlier defined in the book. And that makes it, of course, a personal book, a book that's personal to you and a book no one else could have made. But what other qualities of this book make it a book that no one else could have made?
I broke with the canonical way of presenting philosophical aesthetics. In other words, if you go to a library or a bookstore or even online and look up the term philosophical aesthetics, you'll see a pretty standard intellectual story unfolded with the usual cast of characters. And I didn't think that this was very relevant in today's world. And also I thought that when we use the term philosophical aesthetics, perhaps we're excluding things like eyebrow pluckers or skin treatments, salons that also call themselves aesthetic salons, use the word. We're excluding the casual uses of the term, let's say, in art reviews, where a reviewer might describe a work of art as being executed in an edgy aesthetic. Or somebody might say, oh, she has great aesthetics. So there are a lot of ways in which the term aesthetics is used, which I think all have a philosophical substratum, but in day-to-day conversations, that's not really the way we look at it. We look at it, aesthetics is a word that we all understand what it means depending upon what our different orientations are. So I wanted to give all the meanings of the word aesthetics equal billing or equal. They all have equal justification for their existence, although some meanings are more engaging than others. And the two that I ended up finding that had the most depth for me really were using aesthetics in almost an anthropological sense. That is, our feelings about the world, the way as opposed to our thoughts about the world, or our feelings about the world, then which we then think about as being one aspect of aesthetics that I think we all engage in, even if not fully consciously. And then, of course, philosophical aesthetics, which when the main game of philosophical aesthetics is trying to figure out what art is. I think that's quite amusing that philosophers have been trying for quite a while to define the term art, and they always fall short. And these are very smart people, and it's a very short word. So that's an interesting place for your intellect to depart from, and that's what I try to do in the book. And I think that this twisty way of thinking about things is probably indicative of the way my mind works, and that makes it probably unique to me.
And from the sort of persona it's possible to draw from your books, from all the books that you've put out there, at least from the persona that I draw from them, it's hard to picture you. It's hard to picture you getting involved too deep to the exclusion of other things in the sort of heaving tomes that make up the arguments philosophers have had back and forth about what art is. It sounds like you maintain a certain distance from that keeps it maybe a little more interesting or even more fun for you. Is that accurate to say?
I would say so. When it comes down to it, I'm not dogmatic about a whole lot of things. I like to explore new artistic philosophical terrain, introduce new domains, but maybe leave it to people in the future to infill them. In terms of defining what art is, I think I mentioned in the book that for functional definition, I think for a functional everyday definition of what art is, probably a modified version of the so-called institutional definition works. You see it in an art gallery, or if somebody who calls himself an artist says it's art, well, why not? It's art. And if you think it's art, then it's art. Because this is the way in which we ultimately determine what art is on an individual basis, even though you may not be able to logically defend your definition. In a sociological sense, art is what artists say it is, and what gallerists say it is, and what critics say it is.
Now, in your life and career so far, and in the way you think about the world, how much have you ever felt the need for a working definition of what art is in your mind? You know, how much have you needed to have that to return to that can be literally spelled out in that way?
I haven't really in my work, but sometimes, like all of us probably, I've cringed when I've seen things like a car being marketed, a new automobile being marketed as a work of art, or a perfume packaging being a work of art. We've all seen this, the merging of design, so-called design, and fashion and art sort of moving together in one current. I just think that this is an interesting moment in our collective history, where art is a high value enterprise. Art objects are high value entities, and it's almost an aspirational quality we want to imbue other things with, and so be it. It's a marketplace term more than anything else. I'm not going to fight the flow.
I want to get a little more of an idea about how you define this moment that you've just described in our culture. Now, you really do see it as exceptional in the sense that it is an exception from what humanity has been experiencing in this sense. For how long? I mean, what's the span of time on which this moment is an exceptional time, a different time, a time where this has just started to happen?
Not all cultures would agree what art is, and nor have historically cultures even bothered to define it. When I was spending a lot of time in Japan, it was curious to me that the concept of fine art, as we know it in industrial Western countries, is something that was brought to Japan relatively recently, last few hundred years. There are manifestations of things that we in the industrialized West would have called art, which were not seen as art or called art in Japan. And so the fact that our attention is so much on it, that it's preoccupied the common imagination, but in bizarre ways sometimes, that an artist can get $100 million for a diamond-studded skull,
yes,
is something that is newsworthy. Is it artworthy? Is it art? These are questions that also the popular press addresses and answers in a way that ain't this a strange world we live in? I think more things are considered art or called art as opposed to well-crafted objects or skillfully conceived objects or rhetorical objects that maybe ask questions or answer questions that are implied. There seems to be more of this going on than ever before. And, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow I pick up the the New York Times, and I read that somebody of importance in our culture says that the whole Google enterprise is the best art piece of the beginning of the 21st century.
And you mentioned before the sort of car commercials that come out that mention this new model, this 2009 Ford, what have you, is a work of art. Now, what is your reaction when you see these things pop up in the media?
I mean, I see two things. I see that from, let's say, a content analysis point of view, meaning that how many times do we encounter the word art in our daily lives? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And I think it's increasing. So that car commercial, certainly in the beginning days of the automotive industry, I can't believe that they would use the word art. They may have used the terms engineering or reliability or played on class status for differentiation. Using art means that they've that the positive aspect of art, that it's not just an undertaking for effeminate people, has reached pretty deep in the culture. Also, a little bit amusing that if we use words in too elastic a way, in other words, if word meanings become too flabby, then the words cease having the vitality that and the magic that they have when we use them a little bit more sparingly. It might be that I hear the word art and I go, ho hum. What else is being is this label being stuck on? In other words, it loses its meaning becomes diluted, and its power becomes diluted. And we've seen this. I've seen this happen with other words too, like the word Zen. And now when people, Zen-like clarity of the menu, or the Zen-like fragrance, stretching it to in ways which I have trouble conceiving sometimes. So that now when people ask me or mention the word Zen, I have to say, I really don't know what you're talking about.
The concept and the issue, or maybe the problem of the devaluation or deformation or dilution of words like these, it's something that started to bubble up in my mind as soon as we started talking about, the concept of art. And do you think, or have you thought that the word aesthetics or aesthetic or anything like in that family has been in a similar danger?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I poke fun at that a little bit in the introduction to the Which Aesthetics Do You Mean book. Definitely, and that's why I wanted to look at all the different meanings and let the reader decide which are trivial and which are not. Perhaps to qualify the term aesthetics. When you use it, do you really mean artful beauty? Do you really mean when you say, he really has a great aesthetic sense? Do you really mean stylistic, or do you mean tasteful, or do you mean is it a synonym for art? If I don't say it in Which Aesthetics Do You Mean, but one of the things that subsequent to writing the book, I'm very wary of using the word without qualifying it, and if there's a synonym, a less grandiose synonym, I'll use that.
There is, of course, the definition in the book when you talk about aesthetics as used in the sense of the beauty parlor, for example, or the grooming sense. I believe maybe the references to a bikini wax or something in there. And that makes me suspect, and tell me if you think this is true or not, that one of the one of the ill effects taking its toll on the word aesthetics is a kind of maybe prestige that it lends? Or do you think the word has historically lent enough prestige to get kind of watered down by marketers and what have you?
I do think it's a beautiful word. And it's a word that has its roots in the Greek term for perception, but it's also a relatively modern word. It was first used in the senses that we use in the senses that we use it now in a rudimentary form, nearly 300 years ago. Can you be a little more specific in your question?
Sure. What I wanted to get at is, if you think, or what you think the nature of just the quality of the word aesthetics, do you think people are saying, oh, aesthetics, that word sounds precise and it sounds advanced and it sounds, what associations do you think people are seeing that lead them to apply it, maybe without good reason, to a very wide swath of topics that end up diluting the effectiveness of that word? In
the book, I define it as aesthetics is in the most rudimentary sense, it's appearance. I don't like the aesthetics of the poppy seed bagel. I don't like the aesthetics of scrambled eggs. I prefer hard-boiled eggs. It's a way of saying that in that case I would agree with you. It's there is maybe a status value in using a polysyllable word in terms of a monosyllabic word. I also define aesthetics as style, the modernist aesthetic. We could talk about high-rise buildings. Why not just use the word style? So in every article, every issue of Architectural Digest, you'll see 3 uses of the word aesthetics. And it's just that when the writer runs out of synonyms, they'll use it. And why not in that context? It's also a synonym. Another synonym for aesthetics, I think, is taste. It's also a philosophy of art. Aesthetics is also like Kant's aesthetics or Duchamp's aesthetics is a thesis or explanation of an aesthetic sensibility or artistic sensibility. Aesthetics is also a synonym for artistic. Also a synonym for beauty or the beautiful, or beautification. Beautification as in we're talking about the beauty parlor or the aesthetic salon. And then there was also the anthropological use of it that I was talking about, or uses a cognitive mode. It's a way of being in the world, an aesthetic awareness of things. So aesthetics could be applied to anything, even post-structuralist financial analysis. It also, in totality, aesthetics is a kind of a language. We could talk about it as a coded language that we'll find in the art domains, where we talk about gradations of color or the way in which a person uses Teflon glue or asphalt on their painting. I'm sorry to have wandered so far away from your original question. Yes, I think there's a certain status value in using the term, but it might amuse me, but who am I to discriminate against people using it as they would?
I am very much in favor of wandering away from a question when it leads to something rich, and I think you've said a lot of things that I do want to get into. And first, I should mention though that in anything that I read about your own career, about the work you've done, or when I read your books, or when I read about your books even, or when it's mentioned that you do design and aesthetic consultancy, the word aesthetics is one that always comes up. And this might sound fairly grand as a question, but feel free to take it in any way you like. Do you consider aesthetics to be the central concept of your work?
Probably, yes.
And in what In what definition of aesthetics would that be then?
Well, I think it started from, a cognitive mode. I found myself as a young person interested in philosophy, in that it was a questioning of what we do, who we are as human beings. Also a person who had artistic instincts. My father, my stepfather, my mother, they were all artistically inclined people, and it was something that was, encouraged in my family. So when I looked out in the world, how do I make a living? Everything paled in comparison to doing something romantic and sort of amorphous and beautiful. Obviously, there's no job description that encompasses those things, I don't think. But I started off being an artist, and then found that I needed a little bit more intellectual rigor, and I went to architecture school and found that I probably wouldn't be good dealing with clients. I sort of wandered back into art a bit and started making this magazine, the Magazine of Gourmet Bathing, as you mentioned. After doing that, I was in Japan for a while, and it was in the early 80s. And when I would ride the subway, more and more people were wearing black and gray in these asymmetrical cuts. And I asked a friend of mine if he could get me into a fashion show, because I wanted to see a little bit more how this played out on the runway. And I ended up doing a book about Japanese fashion that came out in 1984. I really loved the process of making a book. So books became a way of dealing with aesthetic issues in various different ways. Among them are just the playing with the materials of making a book. Then when I made my first book, it was in 1983. The first Macintosh had not come out yet, and the computers were rather crude and noisy. And even when the first Macintosh did come out, it was not capable of really, you couldn't really do a book on it at that point. I think the first Macintosh I had, there was like 15 pages maximum of word processing space. I found that the bookmaking realm was a good place for me to play around with things aesthetic and all the different meanings. And it wasn't until later on, I'd say the early 90s, that my subject matter became focused on what I would call aesthetic subject matter exclusively.
If you've just tuned in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. My guest is design philosopher and bookmaker Leonard Koren, author of Which Aesthetics Do You Mean? 10 Definitions, as well as many other books, and publisher in the 1970s of Wet, the Magazine of Gourmet Bathing. When this interview is over, if you want to hear it again, visit colinmarshallradio.com. Our complete Marketplace of Ideas interview archive is there, meaning that you can listen to any other show we've ever aired as well. That's colinmarshallradio.com. You want a certain guest to come on the show? You have any feedback? You want to hear more or less of some particular part of the program? Email me, Colin, Colin, at colinmarshallradio.com. That's Colin at colinmarshallradio.com. If you want to hear the show on iTunes as well, you can open up iTunes. You can go to the iTunes store and search for the Marketplace of Ideas. There you can download them all as well. Now back to the conversation with Leonard Koren on the Marketplace of Ideas. Cultural conversation of the depth you demand. In terms specifically of bookmaking, what is the balance in your mind of how your books should be about certain aesthetic principles and how they should embody them? Because I think they all do both. They're all the ones that are about certain aesthetic principles are about them, as well as embodying them in their sort of physical forms of being books. But how do you think about that? Do you think it's a 50-50 task for these books, or what's your conception?
Well, you're sensitive and kind to note that. Books, we're not talking about e-books. We're talking about physical books, the way I conceive them, the way I conceive the books I do, and the reason that I think there's a validity to making physical books is because they are they're experiential. They're portals to experience, but they're experiential entities on a physical level. I'm very conscious of that, and I try to imbue the books I make with a sense of the specialness of the object, but not in the conventional way. The conventional, or what I perceive as the conventional way of making things special in our culture, is to make the 500-pound book, or make the book that's 2 meters by 2 meters. I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but to make a book that will look good on a coffee table, that is making a book with special qualities, or making it maybe a platinum cover, or a velvet cover, or having 10-color printing inside. But that's not the kind of specialness. There's infinite kinds of specialness you can imbue a book with, and the kinds of specialness that I try to is working with humble materials and trying to extract or focus the attention to the values of whatever materials I'm working with. So I try to make a point that my books cost under $20 retail price, and that they're not physically heavy, so that you could transport them effortlessly, and that there is a certain quite nice tactile quality to them, not exaggerated, but that your fingers enjoy turning the pages. I try to make books that don't smell, that they have solvents have dissipated before they get into your hands, and that the visuals that are employed in the service of the ideas of the books are not the typical ways to represent our world. I will go out on my way to try to see things in a unique way. So one book, maybe my quirkiest book, was a book called 13 Books, and it was a book about how I made my previous 13 books at that particular point. Instead of having photographs of my various books or the pages therein, I commissioned an illustrator to reproduce the covers and the insides of the book. And I really gave the illustrator, this person, a very fine artist named Gary Panter, I gave him free rein in doing this. And I never even looked at what he was doing, which is not the way I usually work, until he was finished and I was about to put them into the book. I knew exactly where his illustrations would go, but I didn't censor or guide him in any way. I just told him what the basic premise of the book was to begin with. And I was taken aback by some of his illustrations because they were, some of them weren't as sensually satisfying as I know he often works in. Some of them were extremely pared down and maybe a little bit too austere. But I found it an interesting exercise to be confronted with things that I had made reimagined or reflected by somebody else, and I thought it was important to maintain the purity of his perception in the service of this book, which was so that it wasn't just me, me by me by me. There was somebody else's intelligence and skill there that I kept my hands off of. Going back to your question, every book I do, the physical qualities, the object qualities, as I call them, of the book is an integral part of the whole enterprise. And to give it a 50-50 designation of importance, I would know how to fractionalize it, break it down to what is what. But it is very important. And if it ever ceases to be important, if the object quality of a book ever ceases to be important, then I'll start making ebooks. And conversely, my books are not available in ebook format because I don't feel that the ebook format is yet there. It's a long way off from offering the kinds of total sensory and intellectual information collage that I expect from a book. It's ebooks are in their infancy, and tangible physical books on paper or paper-like substance have been around for hundreds of years, and it's a much more refined and high-resolution medium. I prefer to work in traditional books.
And in addition to the object quality of your books, there's another concept that comes to mind when I read them, or even just when I look at them, which is the union of form and substance. I mean, I like the object quality, but as well, it seems like the content of the books is somehow unified with how the books are made. And I'll illustrate this by a negative example, and I'll say that a lot of the books that I just sort of pick up or have sent to me in the mainstream, the text is an entity separate from the actual physical thing, so it's like somebody united just some text with just some pages and a cover, and the left hand didn't know what the right was doing. I feel instinctively that two books with completely different content should not have the exact same form, and yet many do out in the bookstore. Is that a notion that makes any sense to you as a bookmaker?
Completely. I mean, you seem like you're my ideal audience because you're perceptive about these kinds of issues, and they seem to maybe be of value in your life. Yeah, I think that there often when I would make books, I would start working on, let's say, the typography or the design of the book before I started writing it. I would do everything simultaneously. Everything evolved together. On one hand, it's good because when I reached an impasse with, let's say, some writing chore, then I could do some designing chore and use a different part of my brain. I think also philosophically and almost viscerally, I sense that it all has to come together at the same time, as opposed to this phenomena that you're referring to, where often a book is written, there's a text, and then it's given to a graphic designer, and the graphic designer might read it or skim through it and come up with a design for it. And then maybe either that designer or some other designer would read it or skim over it and come up with a cover for it. Covers are often, when I go to a bookstore, I'm amazed by how clever so many of the covers are. They're brilliant. They're wonderful. They're even more potent than the old vinyl record album covers used to be. There's an amazing amount of information that's conveyed in a cover. But then when you open up a book, it usually doesn't follow through. It's usually not consistent. We all make choices of what books we want to, say, purchase or borrow from a library. but I do it as often with my hands as I do with my eyes. I'll pick up a book, and if it's the right weight if everything is in balance physically, I'll be attracted to purchase or borrow the book because there's a harmony that is appealing to me. And this is a very peculiar, if I think about it, it's a very peculiar way to select reading material, but sometimes it's yielded some nice results. So, yes, I think that in an ideal world, all products would be conceived in this way, sort of where everything comes together simultaneously, because that's where you get the most organic and integral kinds of relationships. Sometimes the design might inform the content of the book. That's often happened with me. But in the workaday world, we have such high division of labor. It's often not the case.
It is something I think about quite a bit whenever I hear from the publishing industry that things are looking so bad and they're not moving many books these days. I do always want to say to them, well, there's so much cognitive dissonance emanating from a lot of the books you put out with the clever covers. If I were talking to one of these publishers, I say, you put out the clever covers and the text that really might be good, but it's not unified with the whole. And maybe that's why people aren't paying $24.95 for these mainstream published books. And I wonder to myself, well, maybe this is a lesson publishers will learn if their sales take enough of a hit and if ebooks siphon off the content for which design doesn't matter so much. But with what you've just said, it maybe strikes me that this is possibly by the nature of publishing, by the scale of publishing, this is a lesson that it can't really learn, can it?
No, I agree with you. They can't really learn it. What I'm doing is micro cottage industry. One person doing the whole thing, except running the presses. And actually, oddly enough, I do find myself asking the printers questions that sometimes they've never been asked before, or at least they claim they've never been asked before, trying to get at the root of how to make something better. I think that publishers will go the way of music. Book publishers, and e-publishing really works for them a lot better. They're really marketing organizations, or that's where they excel at. Get rid of the distributor. I mean the warehousing. You have a distributor, which is whichever online stores are working the best in a particular moment, and try to do their mass market best. My ideas don't appeal to huge mass market, generally speaking, and the books I make don't either. And I'm kind of stuck with who and what I am. And this is what I do. If I had to start all over again and I was younger, I'm sure I wouldn't do this. But this is what also gives me pleasure in life. So. I'm on this road to the end.
And would it be right to say, just judging by what I've read about the stuff you've made and the stuff you've done, is it right to say that your books have been, in a sense, the sort of flagships of your career, in that they've been examples of your own aesthetic sense, and their existence has sort of led. They often call it aesthetic consultancy, requests for that to come back to you?
I mean, do people hire me to advise on aesthetic-related issues because of my books?
Is that what aesthetic consultancy means? It's a term that I've heard in relation to you, but I mean, I have not probed that industry very closely.
Well, thank you for telling me it's an industry. I do get calls from time to time to consult on projects of various sorts. The latest ones have been communications related. People have products that they've developed or about to bring to market or have brought to market, but somehow they're not connecting with the don't know how to connect with the audience or their buyers, consumers, in the way they want to. In America, we use the term ad nauseum these days, branding. Like brand managers, trying to make. I think Apple computers is used as an example of branding par excellence, where there's amazing consistency on every level of the company for the product and the advertising and the marketing, etc., the brochures. In Europe, the people who I've lately been consulting with, the term branding, the companies I've been dealing with, if I once made the mistake of using the term, and I was almost admonished because I had the sense that it was demeaning to the products, the objects that these people were making. They weren't trying to brand anything. They made products that were that they were proud of. They weren't trying to sell warm, fuzzy feelings. They had something that they thought was legitimately good, and they wanted to know how to get it out there without creating a mystique about their company. You don't have to buy we hear these stories about people buying a Tiffany or a Louis Vuitton key ring so they could buy into the brand or the mystique of a particular company. I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but I'm a quirky guy. I have some quirky ideas. There's some skills that I have that would all sort of fall into the rubric of aesthetics in one meaning or the other. And occasionally, people pay me money to solve problems or engage in thinking with them. If that's what an aesthetic consultancy is about, then that's what I do. But I've never used the term, nor have I really heard it before.
See, that's. I should point that out to the couple of paragraphs I've seen that on the internet. I should tell the people who wrote those that that's not a term you use because
it's okay. I don't care. In our world today, the unintended consequences of saying or writing something or implying something or somebody thinking that you implied something, it's amazing. I've seen this most vividly with my Wabi-Sabi book, which was when I wrote that book, the Wabi-Sabi for Artists, Designers, Poets, and Philosophers. I thought it was in 1994 when it came out, and I had a lot of friends visiting the Bay Area to go to a Mac World, Macintosh World conference. And I felt like I was totally in some kind of evolutionary backwater, dealing with analog ideas, the beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete, when they were rushing headlong into the pristine perfection of the digital age. And then I saw, from becoming this obscure concept, Wabi-Sabi, to being written up in mass-market women's magazines as sort of the new feng shui, made me realize that if you put an idea out there in the culture that has a certain magical resonance for one reason or another, it will take on all kinds of forms you never imagined were possible, and it'll come back to you in its exact opposite form also.
And before we end, I do want to touch on an element of the story of the creation of Which Aesthetics Do You Mean, the personal story at the end of the book. And you mention in that how during the process of a bad legal experience, you approached parts of it as if they were an avant-garde theater experiment, or parts as if it were some sort of aesthetic exercise. And you mention in the book about the Viennese flower shop how that aesthetic experience really did improve your life at that point. And there's something at the core of this I really want to know about. I'm not 100% sure how to put it, but How much of life can be approached in this aesthetic way, approached as an aesthetic experience, and be made more, I don't know if pleasurable is the word, but be made richer, more interesting, or more handleable in that sort of aesthetic framework?
Each of us goes around on a daily basis, and we probably shift frames of reference many times in the manner in which we conceive of the world. If we're working on our income taxes, we may conceive of our entire lives at that moment as we're just tax entities. We're just these entities that go around making purchases and spending stuff and borrowing money and saving money. There's a number. There's monetary. We could monetize our existence, view it through that lens. And then there's some people who walk around. I know I have friends who use the word spiritual a lot. There's spiritual this, there's spiritual that. They have a nice spiritual quality, and so they view the world as that there's some kind of the spiritual essence that the world is imbued with that you could tap into, that that you can become aware of and enjoy life through that. And then in their preferred moments, they exist in their spiritual world. And for me, I would have to say it's about beauty and things artistic and the sensations of being alive, which are both there's some ideas that tickle my brain. Like, let's say one of the ideas of cosmology that in the last decade that I think of is an aesthetic idea, although it's an idea that people who are looking at the origins of the universe, scientists, grapple with, and the question that they've tried to address is, before the Big Bang, where did the stuff for the Big Bang come from? And the conclusion of some of these cosmologists is that the universe that we know it, which is definitely something, our universe, comes from nothing. So the bottom line is that something comes from nothing. This doesn't compute in our everyday rational lives. Something does not come from nothing. There must be some substratum somewhere that we just don't see, or but it can't just come from nothing. But the fact that bona fide scientists are entertaining these kinds of notions, and that this might explain what reality is about, that nothing could be the mother of something. To me, it's very beautiful. It's a very beautiful idea. So it's an aesthetic idea. So I walk around for a good part of the day looking at things. It's let's say human behavior. That was a beautiful gesture so-and-so made. Oh, that so-and-so's generosity was quite lovely. I see it in terms of beauty and not beauty. I think it is. I think many of us do this when we go. People who are fortunate enough, let's say, to who live in a dense city and then leave the city on the weekends and go out to the country, and they say, this is really wonderful. Well, when they're in the country, they make a fire and maybe they make a dinner, and everything that they do has certain. They imbue it with certain qualities of attention, where they notice colors and smells and shapes and maybe even ideas that they evaluate on levels of whether they're beautiful or sensorially think we can exist on an aesthetic plane of existence. It has just as much legitimacy in the span of human experience as philosophical existence or scientific existence or existence, engineering existence, and that's just my little neck of the woods that I feel most comfortable in also.
The name of the book, once again, is Which Aesthetics Do You Mean? 10 Definitions. Leonard Koren, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the program today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about Leonard Koren, visit Leonard Koren, that last name is KOREN.com. This has been The Marketplace of Ideas. I've been Colin Marshall. You can hear this show again at colinmarshallradio.com, the home of the complete Marketplace of Ideas interview archive. You can also find it on iTunes. Visit iTunes, go to the iTunes store, type in The Marketplace of Ideas, search for that, and there you'll find the page with all of the shows available for download for free as well. The website of Ben Althouse, the man who makes our theme music, is available at benalthouse.com as well. It's ALTHOUSE, by the way, on that name. Feedback, questions, comments of any kind, send those straight along to Colin, COLIN, at colinmarshallradio.com. I will almost definitely reply to you. As always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on The Marketplace of Ideas, cultural conversation of the depth you demand.